It's time to get educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. This is the Dr. Duke Show.
Hello, peeps out there in Peepsville, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show. Before we get started, I want to ask you to please hit the share button. More and more of you are doing that, and it really does make a difference. So hit the share button so more people get this information. And before we start, I want to also give a shout out to our friends at Clean Start. I am not somebody who obsesses about sanitation. I'm not one of these guys. I'm not OCD, but this is really a great product because it is a hand sanitizer that works for 2 hours. It is odor-free, thankfully. It is a foam pump, so it's not messy. It doesn't spill all over the place. And this stuff actually helps cure wounds. So if you have a survival kit, if you, as a responsible person, you have some supplies tucked away in case of emergency, you want to buy a 2-gallon bottle of this. It makes 19 bottles this size. Visit simplyfreedomproject.com/clean. This is called Clean Start, Kleen. So all you have to do is visit our website, freedomproject.com/Kleen. We are joined again by our international correspondent, Alex Newman. Alex, good to have you back again.
Thanks for having me, Duke. Great to be with you.
Well, we have another story here that I think is indicative of the very perilous times we live in, and this one has to do with charter schools. This was going to be the one-time solution, wasn't it, to our problems? And it was kind of always from the beginning, the whole idea of charter schools was kind of naive. We would allow money to be diverted away from public schools, but that money's already been paid in taxes. The states have that money, and then we divert it away from the state and the feds, and then you create a separate school that might be a classical school, a real school, not what we get in the public sphere. And it didn't really seem to dawn on the creators of this that as long as the states and the feds are paying for it, inevitably they were going to co-opt it like they co-opted everything else. Nevertheless, we have a new twist to the charter school program. We have an authoritarian billionaire, a dictator basically, who's willing to spend $750 million to funnel into charter schools. And my obvious first question is, Alex, what's he going to get for his money?
It's a very good question, Duke. And I think there's several things going on here. One, you've got a lot of billionaires in this space. You've got Mark Zuckerberg, you've got Bill Gates, you've got now Mayor Michael Bloomberg. And a lot of them are profiteering big time, right? Bill Gates in the most obvious way, but Michael Bloomberg as well. I'm sure there is something in it for him. But there's also the ideological implications. See, Michael Bloomberg is a totalitarian in an extreme sense. I've run into this guy multiple times at UN conferences and stuff. He's always surrounded by armed bodyguards. Meanwhile, he is fanatically trying to disarm the American people. He goes to these UN climate conferences and he demands all sorts of controls on the economy, basically a demolishing of the middle class, demolishing of the independent business owner or the farmer and rancher. Says we can't, drive cars anymore. Meanwhile, he flies in on a private jet, then he flies home to his mansion, gets in his helicopter, flies out to the coast, gets in his yacht. I mean, this guy is an authoritarian hypocrite and a monster. And here he is pouring money into charter schools. You would be naive to the max to think that this guy just wants your children to have a better education. This is a guy who claims that the mass murdering dictatorship in China is not a dictatorship. So what do these billionaires all have to gain from pushing this charter school? I think there's several things. One is profiteering. And I don't know exactly the mechanics of how Bloomberg plans to make money on this, but I guarantee you he does. Two, you have families now all across this country, millions of families who are fleeing the government's collapsing institutions, these so-called public schools. And for good reason. The kids are getting dumber, they're being radicalized, they're being sexualized, they're being weaponized against their families, against their churches. So people are fleeing. Well, I think this charter school effort is really an effort to bring them back into the government system. Charter schools are government schools. Everybody needs to understand that clearly. They still teach Common Core. They still ban the Bible. They still ban prayer. Charter schools are government schools in every sense of the term. They just have a little bit more flexibility in like hiring and things like that. But they teach the same garbage. Generally, they teach it in the same way. So it is a plan, I think, to bilk taxpayers and also to get more people trapped in the government system. And I'll say one more thing before I toss it back to you, Duke. I know I'm rambling, but Bloomberg has been funneling billions into all kinds of subversive causes, especially gun control. One of the big things he's been funding is politicians who will support his agenda. So in Louisiana, he funded a whole bunch of advocates of charter schools. Well, I saw the aftermath of this. I was in Louisiana. I was speaking at a conference being held at one of the universities down there, Loyola University, and I met a Lutheran pastor who was also speaking there. This Lutheran pastor had attached to his church a thriving Lutheran school with hundreds of kids. I don't remember the exact numbers. Well, when the government authorized these charter school monstrosities, one popped up very close to his Christian school. And what happened? Just enough parents said, oh, a free charter school. I think I'll pull my kids out of this Christian school where I'm paying, put them in the charter school. Well, long story short, the Christian school lost enough students that it closed, it shut down. And what happened? Hundreds more students now were put into the government system. So I think that's what's going on here, Duke.
Yeah, it's a serious problem. And so let me ask you before we break here, is this primarily the left realizing we can't get rid of charter schools, which we'd like to do, so we might as well spend a lot of money to co-opt them?
They already do own the charter schools. So, I think the teachers' unions don't like the charter schools because there's a little bit more so-called accountability. Right? It's easier for a charter school to fire a teacher who's a criminal or a pedophile who's not doing their job. And so that's why the teachers' unions don't like it. But they're authoritarian in the sense that they want to brainwash your kids. They want to radicalize your kids. And so I think this is really a fight within the totalitarian, the authoritarian movement. Charter schools, as far as I'm concerned, are already co-opted. I think this is an effort to corral the families that are fleeing from the government school system back into the government school system by dangling a fraudulent carrot in front of them and saying, well, you don't like the public schools, but here, try a charter school and it's free. And, we won't talk about the fact that they're still going to learn Common Core. They're still going to be brainwashed. They're still not going to read the Bible. So I think it's an effort to keep the families on the government school plantation while giving them what they think is genuine choice.
After the break, let's talk a little bit more about the perilous future of education outside the public schools.
Are you a fan of the show? Consider joining the Patriot Club. Your tax-deductible donation of $99 a year keeps us going. Simply visit patriotclub.us. That's patriotclub.us to pledge your support and receive our signature tumbler as a token of our appreciation. We've got much more to come. Stay with us.
Joined now by our international correspondent again for the second part of our interview, Alex Newman. Thanks again for your time today.
Thanks for having me, Duke.
So let's talk about the last couple of stories we've done over the last period of time. Seem to suggest that there's that what we predicted was going to happen is happening sooner or later, and probably sooner. Now that they have nailed down the public schools, they have completely frozen out parents. They are doing whatever they want to do with regards to critical race theory and sexuality, and no one can stop them. Inside the public schools, no one is able to stop them. So the next step is, now that you've got that nailed down, let's try to make it much more difficult for moms and dads to find alternatives. The first part of this conversation discussed how Michael Bloomberg, liberal authoritarian, is now spending $750 million to co-opt charter schools, even more than they already are. He's a guy who wanted no part of the charter school movement, fought against it, but now that it's here, right, he's going to manipulate it. And we have another story, did another story recently where we talked about how this mandatory pre-K that may be passed shortly by the federal government is going to make it much harder for moms and dads to do any kind of Christian or religious-based preschooling. Those schools may close down, shutter their doors, because once this becomes a free entitlement, we'll see how much more difficult it is for parents to pay for it, the taxes that come along with it. So here we are in a perilous state. They've already made you have conferences going on across the country that are suggesting that homeschooling must be outlawed, it must be regulated. Perhaps maybe we shouldn't let moms teach their own kids unless they have 4 years of indoctrination in big state education programs. What's left to happen here? What do you see over the next few years beyond what we've talked about? What do you think might be coming down the road?
Well, we see the pieces being moved into place right now, Duke, and so it's very easy to see where they're going with this. They are planning a full-blown assault on genuine school choice, quite ironically, under the guise of promoting school choice. We see this in California right now, where they're working on a ballot initiative. And there are a lot of really well-meaning, unfortunately naive people who are getting sucked up into this, thinking, hey, we can deprive the public schools of money by having school choice, and then using that money to send into private schools and homeschools and so on. Well, I've seen this movie before. I lived in Scandinavia for most of the last decade, and we saw this exact process play out. And it was even the same terminology. Oh, the money should follow the child, not the public schools. Oh, that sounds great, right? And parents all jump on the bandwagon. So then they start opening up the flow of tax dollars to these private schools, to these Christian schools. And it's just like the cheese in the mousetrap, right? Same for the homeschoolers. Hey, free money, woohoo, right? And the mouse saying, ooh, yummy, free cheese. Not thinking about, why is there free cheese in this trap? So eats the cheese and boom, then the trap closes. And that's what's going to come next. Once they're able to open up the flow of tax money to private schools, Christian schools, homeschools, independent schools, plus you've got the charter system, then they will close the trap door, and all of those will come under the authority of the government. Moms and dads who are taking government money will be expected to take the government's tests and meet the accountability. Christian schools that are taking the government's money will have to start teaching the government curriculum. And I saw this happen in Sweden in, I think it was 2011. They passed a law saying, look, all these private schools now that are taking this government money, they must teach the government's curriculum, which incidentally requires that first graders understand that gender is a social construct and so on. So that's where they're headed. We see them laying the groundwork now for a legal assault on homeschooling. That lunatic totalitarian out of Harvard University, Elizabeth Bartholet, is running around the country preaching the good news of banning home education with her sidekick, James Dwyer from William and Mary. We've talked about them before on this show. So they are putting the pieces into place to crush genuine school choice. And as horrific as it sounds, they're doing it while flying the banner of school choice. They need to be opposed and they need to be exposed.
Is it possible that the opposite may happen, particularly with the preschool situation? A lot of alarmed moms and dads who do not want to turn their children over to school, to the public schools, even younger, they may decide to start homeschooling their kids at even earlier ages, and more families actually support homeschool because, again, we've reached the point where there are really no other options but homeschooling. So is it possible that things may swing that way?
I think that is what's happening right now, Duke, and the totalitarians realize this. We've had massive growth in homeschooling. The totalitarians are looking at this and saying, oh my goodness, how are we going to bring these people all back under control? So they're working on that now, but we have two opposite forces here: families fleeing and totalitarians trying to corral the family. So it remains to be seen where this will go, but we know what they want.
Today's show is sponsored by Clean Start Hand Sanitizer. For an odor-free foam hand sanitizer that lasts 2 hours and provides 19 refills, visit freedomproject.com/clean. That's KLEEN to order yours today.
All right, it's time for Trending Left, our new segment here at the Dr. Duke Show. We've compiled some of the craziest social media content making waves across the internet for your viewing pleasure. And we start in Long Island, New York, where the CUNY Law School, the City University of New York Law School, has made a few changes to their enrollment application. As Sasha White points out on Twitter, the school has now added a bunch of options for gender, starting with agender all the way down to cisgendered male. There's about 15 of them. And Sasha points out that the form asks for students' pronouns whether they identify as LGBTQ or not. And so my response to this is, why 15? I mean, just 15? I'm offended, right? I could think of 50 different types of genders already, and why are you excluding them? And as my producer pointed out, notice that cisgender males are at the very bottom of the list. So there you go. The next story takes us into the classroom, where a gay high school teacher recently posted a video sitting in front of his gay pride flag, where he discusses why he loves wearing stiletto heels to school every day. Let's find out together, shall we?
I teach high school, and most days of the week I come to school in stilettos. I get to stand at about 6'6", and the reason why is so I can create an explicitly queer space for all of my students. That way they know that this place is a place for them, by them, and because I never had one of those growing up. So, yeah, bit of a beast.
You know, I never knew this moment would come where I actually miss the days of idiot feminism. Speaking of the special people and their community, the LGBTQ has now come out with their own bank. Yes, that's right. Daylight is a bank that was built for queer banking. Here's what they have to say. When it comes to your well-being, you seek out LGBTQ plus doctors, therapists, mentors, even bartenders, people who just get it. Daylight provides that for your financial well-being, and money is just the beginning. Our community has $1 trillion of spending power in the United States, and yet 53% of LGBTQ plus people consistently struggle to maintain regular savings. That's high-key unacceptable. We're done letting the system ignore us. We're going to build Daylight Bank around our unique needs. Quote, different timelines, different kinds of families, different goals and different futures. And of course, the best part, each month they will send you a report showing how queer-friendly your shopping has been. My only thought was, what if we melded two great ideas, gay banks and sperm banks? And sadly, this last story is probably happening all over the country when it comes to parents guilting their children into getting the Fauci ouchie if they want Santa to visit the house this year.
In the grocery line, and there's a woman ahead of me talking to her friend that was with her, telling her about how she scheduled all of her kids for their, COVID vaccination appointments. Well, she had one of her kids with her who was a little boy. And of course, his reaction to hearing this was, no, I don't want to get a shot. They hurt. Please don't make me get a shot. Blah, 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 blah. Typical kid response, Her reaction to him was this. If you don't get your COVID vaccination, Santa can't come to the house and bring you gifts, because Santa can only come into the houses of vaccinated children to bring them gifts. So that's what we're doing now. So the little kids in Timmy's class that maybe can't get the shot, Santa ain't coming to their house? Okay.
More nonsense to discuss next week. It's time now for some real education. We've been studying Rembrandt all week, which is a joy, I must tell you, to be able to get away from some of these crazy stories and look at some art and some culture. It just salves my soul. And Rembrandt, of course, has a number of paintings, about 60 of them, that are based on biblical imagery. And a lot of those come from the Old Testament. He lived in the Jewish quarter for a long time in Amsterdam, and as such, he became friendly with many of the Jewish community of Amsterdam. And so he was very interested in Old Testament themes. And so to honor our Jewish friends and to honor Hanukkah, we decided we would look at some of these Old Testament paintings. And today is probably the most famous painting, that one of them at least, that Rembrandt ever painted. And this is one of the most praised and admired pictures of any painter in the history of art. Some go so far to say it is the greatest painting ever painted. It is Rembrandt, and it is the prodigal son, that wonderful story. Now, that story comes from the New Testament, but it does have a lot of Old Testament resonances, which is why I wanted to bring it in here. It reminds me very much of a lot of his imagery in these Old Testament paintings. You have the story of the prodigal son. You have the beautiful tenderness of the young son, the one who has been the wastrel, who has spent up his family's money, the inheritance that would have come to him when the father died. And he spent it on loose women and riotous living. And now he's come back, not brazenly, not demanding more, but coming back to simply be one of the hired servants on his father's estate, because they eat better than he is now that he is broke. And you can see how broken down he is. The clothes that he wears are torn and tattered. One of the most famous aspects of this image is those two bare feet. That one bare foot on the left that is exposed. He's shoeless, heelless. The downtrodden way that he has shaved his head in repentance for what he has done. And the loving way that the Father brings him back. This is the Father who takes him back. And notice that the right hand of the Father is much thinner and more feminine, The left hand is much larger and masculine. The implication seems to be that Rembrandt, the embrace of the father, is both masculine and feminine. It's a family kind of a thing, bringing him back into the fold this way. And then to the right, of course, you have standing the older brother who did not rebel, with his arms crossed in disapproval, while perhaps the mother and maybe a family friend or a tax collector behind them. So this is a really complicated image. And when we think about when Jesus, who was Jewish, was giving these parables to his people in Judea, it's amazing how much the importance of the New Testament. I always tell my kids at school, Jesus was not walking around Judea with a copy of the New Testament in his pocket. His frame of reference was the Old Testament and possibly moving forward.
If you have a question for Dr. Duke and Katie, please send it our way by emailing askduke@fpeusa.org.
And that's going to do it for this show. I'm Dr. Duke. Until next time, stay educated, my friends. Keep those Hanukkah lights lit.